Men are often taught to suppress their emotions, which is why perhaps with a low capacity man, he's trying to avoid them versus women and girls are given more permission to feel and express their feelings, but not always taught how to, as I say, feel responsibly, which means, yes, feel your feelings. And just because you're having a feeling, it doesn't mean that you get to act out on whatever impulse that you have that could injure the other people around you or set the expectation that somebody else is supposed to manage your feelings without you having any kind of self awareness of what's happening for you. Welcome to the True Northing podcast with Kristen and Allison. We are continuing our conversation on capacity because it seems like it's really naming something that a lot of people are experiencing, either within themselves or their intimate partnerships, friendships, relationships with their family. It's something that is really speaking to what a lot of people are going through. And we wanted to touch on what we mean by capacity. And in these conversations specifically, we've been talking about emotional capacity. And emotional capacity is how much tolerance someone has to feel the range of life's emotions: joy, pain, anger, frustration, sadness, and um, capacity in how much they can tolerate of their own and others. And so when we've been referring to low capacity, we've been explaining about how some people have low tolerance for their own emotional experience or the emotional experience of others. And there are many reasons why this is the case. And in most all cases, it's because they did not learn to develop that in childhood, whether it was through the modeling of their parents or they weren't allowed to have an emotional experience or they witnessed it was really unsafe for people to have emotions. Maybe there was violence or volatility, all different kinds of reasons why feeling, experiencing, witnessing, and being with emotions was not okay or safe or modeled just from their own witnessing of people and adults around them. And so, as we're identifying capacity, we recognize that it shows up differently in men and women based on societal conditioning, what men are expected and allowed to feel and express in general, how they're expected to behave. And same with women, we're conditioned in different ways. And so we notice that capacity shows up in different ways for both of them. And we're cautious not to ridicule people who experience low capacity because the experience for them of having it is really dysregulating. It's really challenging to live with. And so we have compassion for that while also identifying the ways that it's not only hurtful to them, but can be to the people around them. So just inviting more dialogue on how we experience it, what it looks like. In this conversation, we're going to talk about maybe what it looks like more in women, because yeah, maybe we've experienced having low capacity ourselves or having somebody in our life, but maybe it's harder to identify.
I think about capacity, this word we're using, in terms of nervous system regulation as well. A lot of people have heard that before. Somebody who maybe has a healthy nervous system versus a not so healthy or a less flexible nervous system. So, as you were saying, Ali, somebody with low emotional capacity is somebody who just has very low tolerance or ability to hold the range of emotions. And that is particularly true when it comes to intimacy in relationships. And it happens often in childhood, like we've been talking about, when a person doesn't experience a lot of emotional attunement, or as you were saying, maybe it wasn't safe to express emotionally, whatever it may be. And because that wounding happens in childhood in those primary relationships, that's why in adulthood, when we find ourselves in a romantic relationship, that those same um, sort of self protection mechanisms show up. In simple terms, for the low capacity person, it can be very dysregulating to experience a situation or a relationship that requires them to show up emotionally.
Yeah, requires them to show up emotionally, to feel emotions that weren't safe for them to feel, weren't safe for them to witness. And so anything that pushes them outside of their comfort zone, however they've made that to look, is really dysregulating, and it can show up in different forms. What we often see is defensiveness, denial, blaming, um, quick to anger, shutting down, avoidance, all of these different ways that people learn to not feel and try to get others not to feel and express their feelings.
Yes, well said. And the low capacity person was often raised by a person or people who also have low emotional capacity. So it's like that thread that crosses generations and families, right? It comes from somewhere. And so we've gotten some questions about low capacity women and people wanting to hear more about that. And so this topic of capacity applies to men and women. And we'd like to explore how it presents in women a little bit more specifically today. So when I think of the low capacity woman, what comes to mind is the woman who really cannot tolerate the emotions of others, her emotions as well. She just can't, she struggles to hold um, the emotional bandwidth that life requires, that relationship requires. When somebody else is experiencing any kind of emotion, that can be very dysregulating for her. And so I use this example in one of our prior episodes, the mother who, when her child is having a meltdown or even injures themselves and the child is hysterical, the low capacity mother is going to be immediately dysregulated by the child's emotional expression. And so she's going to react to that situation in a way that says it's not okay to express your emotions, in a way that she will do whatever she can to minimize, shove the emotions down, distract, just not allow the emotion to be expressed. And so that could be as innocent as distraction, which, a lot of us are guilty of, swooping up the child, and the moment they experience any kind of emotion, we pick them up and we shush them and we tell them to go look over there, that shiny thing, we hand them a toy. We do anything we can as quickly as possible to get them to stop feeling what they're feeling. Another example that comes to mind is when I think of a mother not being able to tolerate her child's emotions. It's also, when the child expresses, what is perceived or considered a negative emotion, the mother can withhold love or shame the child or punish the child for whatever emotion they're experiencing. Like they can only tolerate the positive or the child who's easy. Anything outside of positive and pleasant and easy feels to her like I'm being I'm being treated unfairly by this other person. They are dumping on me. This is so unfair. She can't tolerate it. She's not able to look at it maybe more objectively or compassionately. It's almost kind of like a victim mentality. Like I can't tolerate what's happening and what's wrong with this other person that they're making me feel this way and that they're doing this to me. Another example that comes to mind is the woman who can't clearly communicate what she wants or needs. And when somebody else, she kind of expects people to be a mind reader of what she's wanting. And when somebody else is maybe taking care of themselves and making a decision for themselves, she can express resentment. It can come out as like passive aggressive.
So she can come off as passive aggressive because she's suppressing and denying her own needs, emotional or otherwise. And so she's criticizing others around her who have that awareness and are taking care of themselves.
Yeah, and maybe it's by somebody taking care of themselves or doing what they want to do in some way makes her feel unimportant. And so there's kind of this lashing out like, oh, because they are doing that, they're not considering me or they don't care about me or what I want to do.
So there's this expectation that they need to be taken care of, that they can't communicate their own needs or, yeah, how they'd like to spend the day or connect with the other person. They have difficulty communicating that. And so there's an expectation for the others around them to pick up on that.
Yeah. What you just said right there feels very true. There's kind of an expectation or a need for others to make decisions for them or take care of their emotions in some way. Like they can't do that for themselves.
Right. And often that comes from not feeling permission to claim their own desires and wants. And so they're hoping that the other people around them will want those same things and communicate those and make those choices for them because it's probably really unsafe for them to want those things for themselves and let alone communicate them and put them forward. But then there's a disappointment when those things don't happen. And so it's kind of handing over the platter of themselves to somebody else. And it's like, hey, will you serve this? Will you do something with this? And I guess I'll take what I can get. But at the same time, it doesn't feel good because I'm not, you know, nobody knows what I want all the time.
And what we see in both men and women with low capacity is when there is a situation, an emotional situation with a partner, with a child, with a friend. Typically I would say it shows up with partners or children, those close intimate relationships or family members. But friends tend to be a little we tend to be feel less threatened with friends that we trust. But what we see is when an emotional situation presents, which could be somebody is making a request of me, somebody expresses a disappointment in something that I did, somebody is just having their own feelings about something, the low capacity man or woman doesn't know how to exist in that space. It overwhelms their system and becomes incredibly dysregulating. And so they respond to that dysregulation, that inability to meet an emotional experience by doing whatever they learn to do to make it go away, by yelling at the other person, getting defensive, making them feel bad about having their need or their frustration or whatever it is. Anything they're deflecting, anything to make the discomfort of the emotional experience go away because their nervous system cannot hold it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that it doesn't even have to be personal. Like you said, it could be expressing a disappointment about the person, or it could just be somebody saying, I really don't like this meal, or, like something that's totally not personal to the person who's in the same room as them, but just existing within that can be too much for them. Like, I can't stand to be around somebody else's disappointment or upset or um, because I don't have the tools. I don't have the tools to make it through the dysregulation. And so I simply need it to go away, block it out, shun it, deny it, pacify it. Whether, like you mentioned, with children, like, oh, okay, look over here. Well, what does that turn into adulthood? Okay, I'm going to distract myself on screens or with drinking or whatever the distraction is. You used the word flexibility earlier to describe capacity. In high capacity, there's more flexibility. And with the child that you gave the example of, the child who was having an negative feeling, I also think about maybe the child who has a different opinion or perspective or need than the parent agrees with or um, has the capacity to tolerate. And so it's like, oh, do I have the capacity to tolerate a different need or opinion than my own? And so flexibility is, yes, emotional tolerance, but it's also mental tolerance. Can I allow for something else to exist within my own space, within my own mind, within my own feeling body and nervous system? Or is it too threatening?
There's a piece about containment too that the low capacity woman lacks, the ability to contain her emotional experience. She may often look to others to help her soothe or manage what she's feeling. It can kind of leak out where there isn't a lot of awareness about what's happening. It's kind of like I'm experiencing an emotion and I'm on fire and I need somebody to put it out because I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, or a flooding. Like, I'm just going to flood the whole darn space with my feelings because I have no self awareness or self regulation tools to apply here. And so men are often taught to suppress their emotions, which is why perhaps with a low capacity man, he's trying to avoid them versus women and girls are given more permission to feel and express their feelings, but not always taught how to, as I say, feel responsibly, which means, yes, feel your feelings. And just because you're having a feeling, it doesn't mean that you get to act out on whatever impulse that you have that could injure the other people around you or set the expectation that somebody else is supposed to manage your feelings without you having any kind of self awareness of what's happening for you. And so that's what we see more with women with low capacity is low capacity and low tolerance for their feelings, but an expectation that other people should be able to tolerate them and handle them and manage them for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. We often think about the woman as the more expressive person emotionally. But she's expressing her emotion, but in a way that's maybe really unhealthy and really, um, dysregulating for everybody else around, and lacks that awareness or ability to self-soothe.
So her feeling is taking up the whole space that maybe the children aren't able to exist within that, or nobody else is able to exist within that because her feeling is flooding and taking over everything. And she needs everybody else to act and behave a certain way. Otherwise, her emotions will be volatile. And um, so everyone needs to walk on eggshells around her.
Which, as you painted that picture, it so, beautifully connects in my mind to that woman raising a young boy with that low capacity that she has, that inability to regulate her own emotions and kind of spilling out all over the place, uncontained, where there's very little room for the child or anybody else to feel what they're feeling, then he very likely is going to grow up to have that same level of low capacity, but it could look very different where he doesn't allow himself to feel any kind of perceived negative emotion, doesn't allow himself to express emotion or acknowledge his emotions. And his partner, when they express emotions, that's where she might notice his low capacity, she or he. The other person, his partner, expressing any kind of emotion causes him to then shut down or react however he does it. In this case, with the overwhelming mother, it could be commonly a shutdown where he can't tolerate or show up for his partner in those moments.
And it's kind of counterintuitive in a sense to be like, she's low capacity, but she has all these big emotions. Well, what's happening is she's got low capacity to sit with and be with her own emotions that she's spilling over onto everyone else, expecting them to tolerate and hold them when she can't even do it herself.
It feels important to say that you can build capacity, just like training your nervous system to come back into regulation more easily, learning to regulate, right? These are skills that can be practiced and that capacity can be built. So it's not like, oh, you were raised by a low capacity person. Now you are a low capacity person. And that's who you are and you're never going to change. Or if you're in the relationship with somebody and you're recognizing these things or you're recognizing them in yourself, right? This is just the acknowledgement of where you are and how you got here. And it is possible to grow that capacity. However, I would say the key piece is self-awareness. Is is the low capacity person able to acknowledge where they are at? Which through reading a book, are they open to going to therapy? Do you do couples therapy and they hear something that kind of resonates? Is there an opening there, a willingness to acknowledge where they're at, their limitations? Because if you don't start with that self-awareness and that ability to acknowledge, nothing will change. And there are times when people do have the self-awareness and maybe they can acknowledge, but nothing changes, right? So obviously there's a ton of gray here. And we're not saying if you're in relationship with a low capacity person, run, right? We're not saying that. Every situation is unique and there are plenty of beautiful examples where people can grow and heal together. And then there are times when it becomes really clear that the low capacity person isn't able or willing to show up for that work.
Thank you all for joining us in this conversation today. We'd love to hear from you and be sure to like and subscribe and follow along for future episodes.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.